Before we begin, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing you all. Now, let's get into the story. Her name was Amara Ellis, 32 years old, a freelance journalist from Atlanta, Georgia, the kind of woman who walked into rooms and made people forget what they were saying. Beautiful in a way that felt almost unfair to the rest of the world. Curves that told their own story. A long black ponytail that swung with the kind of confidence most people spend their whole lives chasing. She had come. Park Jae-won moved through it like he owned it, which she assumed he did. He set a glass of water in front of her without being asked. She didn't touch it. You should change. There are clothes in the room at the end of the hall. I'm not staying, Amara said. He walked to the window and stood there looking out at his city. And it was his city. She had done enough research to know his name was connected to the Cheon organization, one of the most powerful criminal syndicates operating across East Asia. Legitimate businesses on the surface. Real estate, private security, logistics. Underneath? She'd spent 3 weeks trying to uncover the underneath, and the underneath had apparently decided to uncover her first. She ate because she was starving, and pride is a luxury best set aside when one is hungry. You're not going to tell me why those men were following me, she said. Not a question. No, he said. Are you going to let me leave? He looked up. In the morning. When it's safe. Safe for whom? He returned to his food. That night, in a borrowed black silk robe, Amara padded down the hall. She stopped at the door at the end of the east corridor and pressed her ear against it. Voices. She caught fragments. The photographs and the American woman and something that might have been not yet. Not yet. She was pulling back when the door opened. He filled the frame. Backlit. Enormous. Neck tattoos catching the light. He looked at her for a long, still moment. She raised her chin. I got lost, she said. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a flicker of acknowledgement that they both knew she was lying. The bedroom is the other direction, he said. She walked past him. She felt his eyes on her back the entire length of the hall. She lay in a bed that cost more than a car and stared at the ceiling and thought about the word yet, and what it meant that the most dangerous man in Seoul had decided she wasn't ready for whatever came after it. In the morning, Park Jae-won made her an offer. Amara had planned her exit speech on the elevator ride down. Thank you for not letting me die in the alley. We never met. She never got to give it. He slid a folder across the desk. She didn't take it. Those men last night work for a man named Hyun Tae-suk. He is currently moving a very significant amount of illegal capital through 3 shell companies. I have been building a case against him for 11 months. Amara blinked. You're building a case? You're the Korean Mafia. The corner of his mouth moved. Almost a smile. I am a businessman with significant interest in this. Photographs you took last night show Hyun's lieutenant meeting with a government official who has been claiming to investigate him. You photographed proof of corruption in one evening that my team has been trying to document for months. The room was very quiet. You're asking me to work with you, she said slowly. You have access I don't. A press credential. I have information, resources, and protection. Protection. That's what last night was. Last night was coincidence. What I'm offering now is intentional. She thought about the story already taking shape in her mind. Not the one she'd been sent to write, but the real one. The one underneath. This is how people get killed, she thought. And then, but he had her camera back in her hands before he asked for anything. If I find out you're using me, she said, I publish everything. You included. Understood, he said. He extended his hand across the desk. Large. Tattooed at the wrist. Steady. She took it. His grip was warm and firm and brief. Except that neither of them let go at quite the normal moment, and when she looked up his eyes were already on her face with that same dark, unreadable attention. She took the elevator down. She stood in the glass car watching Seoul rise up to meet her and pressed the envelope against her chest, listening for whether her heartbeat had changed. It had. She told herself it was just adrenaline. She was already beginning to lie to herself about Park Jae-won. That, she would later think, was when the real trouble started. They fell into something that neither of them had a word for. Not friendship. not alliance. Something that didn't have clean edges. They met every second day in different locations, a habit born of caution that started to feel like anticipation. She noticed she began choosing her outfits with more care. She told herself it was professional cover and believed herself just enough to keep getting dressed. He was unfailingly professional. He shared information in clean, efficient packages. He anticipated what she would need before she asked, a car waiting at the right time, security at the edge of a scene without being visible. He was extraordinary at protection. The kind you only noticed in retrospect when you realized you hadn't been in danger and then realized why. The incident in the parking garage was the first time she understood what it actually meant to be in his world. She didn't have time to say anything before Jaewon's hand was on her shoulder pressing her behind a concrete pillar, and then there were sounds, and then silence, and then he was crouching in front of her, his face level with hers. "Breathe," he said quietly. She breathed. Later, sitting on the hood of the car, she said, "You do this like it doesn't cost you anything." He looked at her. His jacket was off. The tattoos on his forearms were more extensive than she'd realized, geometric, precise. "It costs something. Everything does." It was the most personal thing he'd said to her. They ended up at a late-night ramen spot because she said she was hungry and he said nothing but took her there anyway. She told him about the story she'd originally been sent to write, the one about underground artists, and how she'd gotten so far from it that she'd basically forgotten it existed. "I wonder if the artist story was ever the real story at all," she said, "or if the real story was always waiting for me to find it." And Park Jae-won, this force of nature in human form, who had barely smiled in all the days she'd known him, looked at her across the ramen bowls, and something broke through the stone of him like light through a crack. He smiled. Small, brief, real. She felt it like a physical thing. She looked down at her bowl very quickly and told herself the heat on her face was from the steam. The gala was his idea. Hyun Tae-suk would be there. And more importantly, his silent partner would almost certainly be there too. "You need a cover," Jaewon had told her. "And you're proposing yourself. We've been seen together. It's less suspicious." It was practical. It was strategic. It made complete and total sense, and Amara was deeply aware of how hard she was working to catalog all those reasons. She wore deep green. She swept her long ponytail up into something elegant. She looked at herself in the mirror and thought, this is just the job. When he arrived at her hotel room door in a black tuxedo with his neck tattoos just visible above the collar, she thought, this is just the job. She said it enough times that it nearly became true. They moved through the room together. She whispered observations into his ear. He guided her with a hand at the small of her back that she told herself was just for appearances. She got what she needed. And then the evening became something else. Outside in the courtyard, without a word, he slipped off his tuxedo jacket and placed it across her shoulders, adjusting the lapels with both hands. An automatic gesture, the kind the body does before the mind catches up. And then his hands stilled, and they both looked at each other, and the rational explanation dissolved like sugar in warm water. Neither stepped back. J1, she said. Don't, he said quietly. I wasn't going to say anything. I know you weren't. They stood like that for a long time, the city below them, his jacket on her shoulders, the air between them doing what air does when it's been between two people long enough that it starts to carry weight. This is complicated, she said finally. Yes, he said. She handed his jacket back. She went inside. She did not let herself look back, because she knew that if she looked back she would see him watching her, and she did not have room in her plan for what that would do to her. She looked back. He was watching her. The call came from her contact in Atlanta on a Tuesday morning. Amara. His voice was careful. The shell companies you've been targeting, 3 of them trace back through 4 layers of corporate veil to holdings linked to the Cheon organization. He gave you the trail because he wanted you to burn Hyun down for him. He used you to do his work without getting his own hands dirty. The room was very loud and very quiet at the same time. She went to the penthouse. She showed him her phone. She stood in the center of his beautiful, powerful space and asked him with her whole body to tell her it wasn't true. He said nothing. which was, in its own way, everything. You used me, she said. I protected you, he said. Those aren't the same thing. They often are. Your world is not a world I agreed to live in. She walked away. Down the long marble hallway, chin up, eyes forward. She had walked away from harder things than this. She had not walked away from anything that had felt quite this much like leaving part of herself behind. Outside, she stood in the rain. Leave, said the rational part of her. Get on a plane. Write the story. Live your life. Stay, said everything else. She didn't make the decision. It was made for her. A hand on her arm. Not the careful, warm hand she had started to know, but a stranger's grip, hard and purposeful. And then another hand, and the black van at the curb. She understood in one freezing second that Hyun had known about her all along. She fought. She got one of them in the knee. Nearly got free. Then she was being lifted and the rain was in her face, and she screamed with everything she had. At the end of the street, far away, too far, a lone figure. Standing. And then running. Park Jae-won ran toward her like something had finally broken open in him. Like all the control, all the stone, all the careful economy of motion had simply ceased to be relevant. He was running like a man who had something to lose. He took 3 of them down before the van door finished opening. Amara had been fighting for what felt like both 3 seconds and 3 years when the door flew open and she saw his hands, those large, tattooed, unmistakable hands, reaching for her, and she grabbed back, and then she was out, and they were on the wet street together, and his arms were around her, so hard she could hear her own teeth. I have you, he said, low, in her ear. I have you. He cut the zip tie off her wrists. Of a surgeon, and the gentleness of someone who understood that the violence was over, and what her wrists needed now was not more force. Then he held her face in both hands and checked her, forehead, cheeks, jaw, cataloging damage the way a person does when they have just spent 30 seconds convinced they were too late. She was crying. She didn't remember deciding to. I've fine. Stop looking at me like that. He kept looking at her like that. In the car he put his jacket around her without asking. She pulled it tighter. It smelled like cedar. It smelled like him. The doctor said the cut on her arm was minor. Jae-won stood with his fists loosely closed at his sides the entire time, and she watched him from the corner of her eye and recognized what she was seeing. A man trying very hard to hold himself together. Later, in the quiet, he sat on the edge of the bed beside her. He reached out and pushed her ponytail back over her shoulder. His hand slowed near her face, and then stopped. She turned to look at him. I did use you, he said quietly. At the beginning. That was true, but it stopped being only that. Somewhere it became something else. I don't know exactly when. She thought about the ramen steam, the jacket on her shoulders. Every moment she'd catalogued without meaning to. You should have told me, she said. Yes. I'm still angry. I know. She let herself fall sideways until her head was near his shoulder. Not touching. Almost touching. His hand moved over hers on the bed. First true touch. First surrender. From both of them. She didn't move her hand. She stayed. She told herself it was because leaving Seoul in the middle of an active investigation would be poor journalism. She told herself it was because she was close to the story that would define her career. She ran out of things to tell herself by the end of the week. Because the truth was simpler and more frightening. She stayed because of him. Something changed after the night in the rain. Not dramatically, the way rivers change course. Incrementally, until one day the water is going somewhere entirely new and you can barely remember where it used to go. She laughed more. She hadn't noticed how long it had been since she'd laughed freely until she did it one afternoon on the rooftop garden and heard herself, and looked over to find him watching her with an expression so open and unguarded that she had to look away. He stood beside her in the kitchen in a gray t-shirt with his tattoos visible and handed her things and watched her cook and made comments so dry it took her 3 seconds to realize they were jokes. The 3rd time she laughed, he looked incredibly pleased with himself, and she decided in that moment that she was completely done for. He showed her the library. He handed her a book of poetry without saying anything, an expression that said everything about wanting to know what she loved and nothing about how to ask for it directly. The night of the dance happened because she put music on and started moving in her red dress on the terrace because she felt like it. He appeared in the doorway and watched her, and when he stepped forward and extended his hand, it was with the same quality he brought to all decisions: absolute, unhurried, certain. They danced slowly, with soles spread below them. She let herself rest against his chest. His chin came down against the top of her head. She felt his heartbeat against her cheek and thought, there it is. The thing I was afraid of. Here it is, and it doesn't feel like fear at all. It feels like coming home to somewhere I've never been. Later, his hands on her face, foreheads touching, the city dark and quiet around them. In the morning, she lay in the pale gold light and felt something she hadn't felt in years, specifically the texture of a life expanding, a world getting larger. Possibility that scared her exactly as much as it thrilled her. Across the room, he stood at the window with his coffee. Back to her. Soul waking up below him. He looked like a man who had found something he hadn't expected and was deciding, very carefully, very deliberately, what to do with the fact that he didn't want to let it go. She understood that. She felt exactly the same way. They were both, she thought, magnificently, recklessly, irreversibly in trouble. She published the story on a Thursday morning. It ran in 4 international outlets simultaneously. By evening, Hyun Tae-suk's name was in every newsroom in Asia and several in Europe and North America. She sent Jae-won the link before it published. He read it across the small table from her. When he looked up, his eyes were very dark and very direct. It's good. It implicates you tangentially. The shell companies. I know. I read it. You knew I would write it that way. Yes. I knew. She looked at him. You let me anyway. I let you tell the truth. I would not be what I am if I asked you not to. The days that followed were loud. Hyun's organization collapsed inward with the beautiful, terrible inevitability of a building whose load-bearing walls have been removed. There were arrests. Officials who resigned before they could be asked to. Jae-won met with men in suits in rooms she was not in and came out with arrangements she was not told about, and she understood that his world had its own architecture for situations like this. Her editor called. Come home. You've done it. She stood in the penthouse and looked out at Seoul and thought, what is my life, exactly, and where does it live now? She packed, with her hands moving and her mind very quiet and her heart placed carefully to one side for later. Jae-won stood in the doorway and watched her. She stopped. She looked at him. I don't know how to do this. The part where I leave. Neither do I, he said. It was, somehow, the most reassuring thing he had ever said to her. She crossed the room. She put her hands on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, the same one she'd rested against on the terrace, and he put his hands on her waist, like that, with everything between them too large for any words that existed. This isn't finished, she said. No, I don't know what it is. Neither do I. I know what it's not. What's that? Over, he said. At the airport, he walked her to the edge of departures and no further, because he was a man who understood that certain distances were the only honest thing. She rolled her suitcase toward the gate and then stopped and turned around, because she was Amara Ellis, and she had never once in her life not looked back when it mattered. He was still there, standing very still, watching her. All of him in that standing, the tattoos and the jawline and the dark eyes and the man underneath who had learned to smile at her across ramen bowls and had put his jacket on her shoulders before he'd had time to decide not to. She raised her hand. A small thing. A promise. He inclined his head. She went through the gate. On the plane, ascending, soul unfolding below her through the window, she pressed her palm to the glass and thought about the story she had come here to write and the story she had actually lived and the vast, terrifying, magnificent gap between the two. I will come back. He knows it. This is how every real story ends, not with the last chapter, but with the reader turning the page. She lifted her hand from the glass. She faced forward. Below, in the penthouse, in the tower, in the at a window, and the city lights all around him, and the particular quality of a man who has spent 33 years being alone deciding, quietly, deliberately, for the first time, that perhaps that is not the only way to be.